welcome to Sports and History with Milla Rindal-Gardner and Leah Messinger. This week, sports in the 1920s.
The 1920s were considered the golden age of sports. Legends were coming out of all sports, including Babe Ruth, Ty Cobb, Lou Gehrig, and Jack Dempsey. After World War I, America was ready to get back to normal. The migration of people from rural to city increased, essentially increasing the income as well. 1925, 40% of Americans made $2,000 annually. America went on a spending spree. A lot of money was invested into stadiums. Yankee Stadium and West Side Tennis Club were built in 1923, and Madison Square Garden in 1925. The media, radio, film, newspapers made athletes into household names and heroes essentially. The Jim Crow laws still segregated white and black athletes. The 1920s produced many remarkable boxers of all weight divisions. Before World War I, boxing was seen as disreputable and low class. After World War I, bans were lifted and commissions were in charge to keep the sport out of vice. The most famous boxer was Jack Dempsey, who was the heavyweight champion from 1919 to 1926. He grew up in a mining town and was known for his power, quick punches, and knockouts. Growing up in a working-class family, he was very relatable to many of Americans at the time. 1926 was the first Dempsey and Tunney fight, which was dubbed the fight of the century. 120,000 spectators observed, while 50 million people were listening on the radio. Challenger Tunney was tall, blonde, and enjoyed high-class activities. Not as strong as Dempsey, he waited for fighters to tire. Tunney won, but was never as popular as Dempsey.
On August 20th, 1920, the owners of 4 Ohio Football League teams, Akron Pros, Canton Bulldogs, Cleveland Indians, and Dayton Triangles, met to form the APFA, or American Professional Football Association. On September 17th of the same year, they met again and officially chose Jim Thorpe to be the league's first president. Then on September 26th, the league played its first game. This league, known as the APFA, later became known as the name we all know today, the National Football League, or NFL. Harold Red Grange was one of the first players to become star of football. He was a fast runner and one of the first few men to go pro after playing in college. He attracted as many as 70,000 people to the stadium in his first few games alone in 1925. And by 1926, he was playing with the New York Yankees. In 1927, however, he suffered an injury to his knee in a game against the Bears. But he came back to play for the Bears in 1929 after his recovery and played with them until after his retirement in 1934.
Baseball had existed decades before, but was rather slow-paced. In the 1920s, the game became fast with home runs. Bigger stadiums and salaries equaled more viewers. In 1919, White Sox players were charged for conspiring to lose the World Series. The 8 players were acquitted from the charge, but were banned from baseball for the rest of their lives. George Herman Ruth is noted for saving baseball's reputation. Spotted by Jack Dunn and signed with the Baltimore Orioles in 1914, he was sold to the Red Sox, and then in 1920 sold to the New York Yankees. His first year, he had a .376 batting average, 14 stolen bases, and 54 home runs. Every year, he did better. A new stadium was built and became known as the House Ruth built. Other famous teammates, Lou Gehrig, Bob Muesley, and Tony Lazzeri. 1927 was Ruth's best year. He had 60 home runs, .56 batting average. In his whole career, he had 716 home runs. He was big, uneducated, drunk, smoked, got into fights, and chased women, but he changed America. At the beginning of the century, sports mixing racially was illegal. Major League Baseball was not integrated until 1946 with Jackie Robinson. In the 1920s, 2 distinct leagues were the National Negro Baseball League, and NBL, and the Eastern Colored League. There were 63 colored leagues from 1920 to 1949. The most famous black teams were the Kansas City Monarchs, the Philadelphia Hillsdales, the Crawford Colored Giants, and the Homestead Grays. Baseball was just as popular as white games. The NNBL attracted 400,000 spectators in 1923 and sold $200,000 in tickets. Statistics were not stable, as records were not kept, and not much press coverage. 1970s, the MLB made a big effort to get black players' records. In order to make up for past prejudices, many black players were inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. Some examples were Satchel Paige, who was a pitcher and played 21 years in the NNBL and 6 years in the major leagues, Josh Gibson, John Thomas Cool Papa Bell, and Williams Julius Judy Johnson.
Horse racing in the 1920s wasn't too different from the racing we see today, with large tracks where people could watch from the sidelines, betting on horses they thought had the best odds. But there was still a few differences in which the rules and ways they did things differed. For example, the starting gate of the race wasn't even a gate. At the time, it was a simple white rope that got raised when the sound of the starting gun blared. Also, what was different was how people kept up with the horses of the day. They had no television or websites that they could check for results. Instead, they listened in on the radio, or better yet, paid for a ticket to go see the horses run on the track in person. For 1920s horse racing, the horse of the century was Man-O-War. Man-O-War was a large, feisty thoroughbred that stood at 18 hands tall at the withers, which is about 6 feet at his shoulder. With long legs that allowed his lengthy strides and his crazy temper that challenged any jockey, Man-O-War became the horse to remember. He won every race he ran except for one, which he started off running the opposite way of the track and still lost by only a nose. The results of this one race that he lost are still argued over today. After his racing career of 25 wins and 1 loss, Man-O-War retired to become a stud, producing many foals to later become champions. A result of this is that many thoroughbreds today, on and off the track, are related to Man-O-War. Man-O-War was so popular with the public that when he died, they had a casket made just for him and had a live radio broadcast of his funeral. And a statue was raised in honor that can still be visited today. Because there was more leisure time in the 20s, people were able to play and watch sports. This allowed the sports to expand and excel. This is what made the 1920s the golden age of sports.
Next week, tune in to hear the end of our segment with Bobby Jones and Walter Hagen in golf of the 1920s.